Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, March 24th, 2025, and today we're talking about how to improve your soils this spring, what the responsibility of farmers is to their local communities, and cover crops for the early part of the season, if any. So let's do it. All right. Well, happy Monday, everyone. If you can't tell by my voice, I had a big weekend of soccer coaching, watching basketball, and indeed, my Cats won. Also contributed to my voice, but I'm grateful. We also cared for the grafted tomato plants. They are getting ready to go into the greenhouse under shade for a little while, and hanging out with the family. Before we jump in, I wanted to make one quick editorial note about Friday's episode titled Why You Shouldn't Interplant with Onions, but also polycultures are still important. Apparently, I panicked a few people with that title. Multiple people were like, dude, you about gave me a heart attack because they'd already planted onions into their whatever beds. So to be sure, and spoiler alert, if you did not hear that episode, you can still get bulbs from interplanted onions, just that they will be substantially smaller and more at risk of disease. So I don't recommend it. Interplanting is just complex, and if you want good yields, you have to take it seriously. I dedicate an entire chapter of the Living Soil Handbook for that reason to interplanting. Pretty much anything will grow, just whether or not it will thrive is kind of a different question. Anyways, maybe I'll do a basic rules of interplanting show later this week, being that many of us are, in fact, starting to get planting here in the U.S., so be on the lookout for that. Switching gears, at least sorta, a question that comes up every year, usually when people start breaking ground or replanting a garden after failure the year before, is how do I improve my soil? The good news is that there are a lot of very simple things you can do and some more intensive things that you can do and pretty much everything in between to improve your soil this spring. So I thought I would give you just some general advice going into the growing season here in the U.S. for how to improve your soil sort of as you grow. A substantial portion of your soil's health starts in the beginning of a garden's life, and although most of us cannot go back in time, at least I don't think so, possibly the easiest way to improve your soil is not to damage it to begin with. There is, in fact, a brand new plot in the town where I live that I saw, and every time I drive by it, all I can think about is how rough that soil is going to be to grow on, because I can tell that they plowed it way too wet. Like it is just mucky, smeary soil. So chances are that they will be dealing with that mistake for many years to come. A lot of times, especially on denser soils like clay, for instance, like that is, the late winter or early spring is not the time to plow it up if you plan to go that route at all. Sometimes in a drier spring, you can get away with it, but it's a job that should be reserved for when the soil is moist, but does not smear between your fingers. If that happens in your fingers, like the smearing, imagine what's going to happen with a metal plow dragging through it, causing compaction and chunkiness for years to come. So that's the first thing. I just don't start on the wrong foot. I've done many videos on starting gardens, though. So for now, let's just assume the mistake is made and it's time to fix it, or you just generally want to improve your soil. As they say in soccer, though, the next play is the most important one. So next play, you can and should address compaction. Compaction is, to me, one of the most common soil problems on farms. In terms of crop production, it has a huge limiting factor for reasons that I've talked about, but we'll talk about again in the future. If a field was plowed at the wrong time, for instance, or had animals concentrated on it, tractors, heavy stuff of any kind, it likely has some amount of compaction. But if you can't push a piece of rebar 8 or so inches into the soil, it is likely compacted and needs to be decompacted with something like a broad fork. Plants can do that job generally, but just on a larger timeline, a longer timeline. Like it's going to take, like plants can slowly decompact soil, but it can take a long time. And not every plant is good for that. And things like tillage radish aren't necessarily the answer either, because they don't necessarily like to grow in like mucky, compacted soil either. So anyway, continuing on, bare soil, never leave it bare. Bare soil means that you are losing soil organic matter to the atmosphere as microbes consume it and release it as CO2. Poof, all your hard work up in smoke or gas. This goes back to one of the core principles of conservation agriculture: keep the soil planted as much as possible. Nothing will improve soil health quite as well as living plant roots. And so make sure to keep them in the ground as much as you can throughout the season. Diversity is often cited as a core principle as well. And I agree with that. Diversity has a lot of benefits to soil life, nutrient availability, and more. But again, we'll talk about interplanting later. But that often just means different crops in the same bed throughout the course of the year. and they don't necessarily have to be in there at the same time. Of course, try to be selective here with diversity and keeping living roots in the soil. Like, don't just let weeds go bananas in the garden, which will be good for the soil, but bad for the grower. But try to keep the soil full of a diversity of plants as much as makes sense for you in your context. Also, use mulches as much as you possibly can, right? Keep the soil covered as much as possible is a core principle. I did a whole video breakdown on how to use mulches at one point, which you should watch before just throwing any old mulch down, because every mulch has its pros and cons. But mulches not only can create soil organic matter, so long as they are not plastic, obviously, as they decompose, but they hold in moisture for plants and microbes to use for their growth. Mulches likewise help keep soil and particles in place, which isn't the worst idea in the world, keeping your soil there. Soil particles not only provide nutrients to plants via microbes, because soil particles are really just really, really tiny bits of rock that they kind of break up and release the nutrients that plants in a plant available form, to put it very simply. But those soil particles also become the building blocks, the building material for aggregates in the soil. So yeah, keep those soil particles in place as much as you can. In fact, that leads nicely into the third principle of soil health and conservation, which is to disturb the soil as little as possible. Decompacting the soil is important, requires some amount of disturbance, but avoid tilling and just overly pulverizing it as much as you can. And if you should have to till it to get the garden started, which can 100% when done right, set the garden off on the right foot so you never have to till it again. Just do it at the right time, i.e. when it's not too wet. But sometimes our soil needs a little help getting to a healthy place. So perhaps a broad forking makes sense for you in some areas. Maybe it is a subsoiler for others who are on a larger scale, or on a smaller scale, maybe it's just a little fork, like not like a dinner fork, but like a garden fork. Or perhaps it's just like really, really compacted and low in soil organic matter, and you need to kind of start over and work in some compost. Like I am wont to say, don't do what other growers are doing. Don't listen to the dogma. Just do what your soil needs. And that will set you off on the right path so that you never have to disturb it again on any sort of high level. Now, some off the beaten path tips, because I always like to try to add something new to the conversation, a new angle or whatever. But one of them, at least, is to improve your soil through good planning. There is a famous Italian defender, and yes, I brought it back to soccer for a second, but bear with me, named Paolo Maldini, who said, if I have to make a tackle, like slide tackle, I have already made a mistake. In other words, if I have to come sliding in there to get the ball, I was already out of position to begin with. The same idea could be applied to gardening. If someone is having to till up a bed or a garden to start again, it's because the garden was already out of position, so to speak. It hadn't been planned for well, it hadn't been cared for right, and it hadn't been managed properly up until that point. I think every grower gets caught out of position, so to speak, every once in a while, but the better you get at planning, not just in the beginning of the season, but every week, the better off your soil will be, because you will not be forced to make any rash decisions, like a slide tackle, which I wouldn't do in the garden anyway. That could be dangerous. But I don't want to judge. I mean, like I said, context is everything. Also, use some amount of compost. Just get it in there somehow. There has been a trend over the last 2 decades towards treating soils with just mineral applications, and certainly, to an extent, that's fine. But if you do not have the microbes, and the microbes do not have the housing, then you're just adding expensive rock particles to your soil with no workers to release those nutrients for the plants. So, which is where compost come in. Well-made compost can be that microbial housing and food supply. Moreover, very recent studies have shown, or more accurately, they continue to show, compost applications can reduce soil-borne pathogens, improve soil structure, provide long-term microbial habitat, as well as plant nutrition, among other benefits. So, in effect, use some amount of good compost if you can, somewhere, whether it's in the soil, on the soil, even in the plant starts, or in the holes where you plant the plants. Get it in there. Now, cover crops is also something I'm going to recommend, but I'm going to do that in the third segment. First, though, or second, I guess, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about local farms and their responsibility to local communities. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op making living soils in Cleveland, Ohio, using NOP-compliant food scrap compost. They wrote us, quote, "We're stoked to support Growers Daily because healthier, tastier, and generally more decent food systems start with growers like all of you, inquiring minds who care about the land." End quote. Love the folks over there at Tilth. If you're looking for top-notch compost or potting mix, drop an email to the folks at Tilth via info@tilthsoil.com. That's info@tilthsoil.com.
Today's episode is also brought to you by So Right Seeds. So Right Seeds is an heirloom seed company that offers fresh, high-quality, open-pollinated seeds. They have a great selection on their website of over 400 varieties, along with a planter's library with tips for growing. They offer cover crops and bulk packs of seed for sustainable home gardening. The instructions on the back of their packets have all the information you need to get started. Go to So Right Seeds, that's S-O-W, and use my discount code NOTILL for 15% off your order. That's SoRightSeeds.com. All right, enjoy the show.
If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Jared Lukens Black, Budding Moon Farm, who writes, quote, February 21st show, thank you for highlighting the affordability challenge of so many people to afford food, let alone local organic produce, and how that challenge could be exacerbated by all the changes happening. I am a firm believer that all local organic growers should be concerned about and focused on making their produce affordable and accessible for as much of their community as possible, which is a financial and logistical challenge, to be sure. If a majority of our community can't afford or access our product, why should they care if the government is cutting programs that support us? I would love you to dive into this topic more. Thanks for your great work. End quote. All right. Great suggestion. Thanks, Jared. So the episode Jared mentions here is the one where I discussed if food prices being higher would benefit local farms. And the answer is still not really known because it's still pretty early. But what is known is that the food is expensive and it's probably not going to get any better anytime soon. At least not in the immediate. Now, in this comment, Jared suggests that they believe that all local organic growers should be concerned about and focused on making their product, their produce available and accessible for as much of their community as possible, which Jared concedes is a big financial and logistical challenge. To me, the reality is kind of just the reality here. Farming is one of the more impossibly difficult jobs one can actively choose for themselves. Even in its best forms, it's a middle-class income. I think many, if not most, market gardeners care about feeding people and would prefer anyone and everyone have access to their food. But for most people, it is just not possible to make the amount of money required to survive as a business and also give away food for free or at a substantial discount. In fact, I would say the one thing enabling that to happen much at all up to this point on any level has been, government assistance through things like SNAP and Double Dollars programs taken at farmers markets, as well as school programs for buying local produce or other grants provided to local food banks / nonprofits who could buy from farmers at a reasonable price and distribute their food to lower income families. At least some of these programs have been or may become imperiled by the new administration as well, which will hurt both lower income families and the growers. The grants that farmers receive often goes into projects that improve the local air, the water, etc. They make it possible for those farmers to grow more food, which could likewise bring those prices down for the local community. Many farms are able to employ local people as well because of these grants. And I should also add, because sometimes this doesn't factor into people's calculus about these sort of federally funded, tax-funded grants and their distribution, that sometimes it is overlooked that growers pay taxes too. Sometimes a lot, depending on their local property taxes. So grants enable farmers to earn back some of that revenue in ways that benefit their communities. Anyway, getting back to the responsibility of farmers to help their communities, it is sort of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs situation where it's difficult for farmers to have the capacity to also take care of other people when they can barely meet their own needs and they're exhausted. Meanwhile, those who have well beyond all of their needs met get celebrated for just, existing. Specifically, I'm referring to like exceedingly wealthy people. Let's just detour for a minute and talk about what $1 billion is. Because I always enjoy this thought exercise. At least speaking for myself, numbers like 1 billion are really difficult to digest mentally. But it helps for me to kind of do some fun math with it. Think about it this way. Someone with $1 billion, assuming it never takes on any interest, could give one person $1,200 every single day for the next 2,280 years before they would run out of money. Actually, I'm lying. After 2,280 years, they wouldn't run out of money. They would still have over $1 million left of that $1 billion they started out with. Another example of just how much money we're talking. There are roughly 1,200 people in my town. With $1 billion, you could give every single person who lives here $80,000 and still have $40 million left over, which is probably enough to live on for most of us. All that to say, the amount of money some people possess, read hoard, is just bananas. And I'm not trying to play the whataboutism game here. I just look at facts like those and have a hard time getting upset or disappointed with farmers for how much or little they do for their communities. And most of them still do a lot for their communities despite the obstacles, when you compare it to the people who could quite literally solve hunger in the United States and elsewhere, probably in the world, and barely feel it in their bank accounts. To be fair, those individuals may have to sacrifice their ranking on a bit on the world's richest people list, so I get it. Anyway, I mean, I guess in short, to me, this is not a problem of farmers not caring enough or not doing enough. It's not a problem of local populations not having their needs met by farmers. It's a problem of inadvertently shifting the focus of how little the wealthy and or corporations who have a lot of money do for their communities to a problem of the poor not doing enough for the other poor. I mean, certainly one could come up with examples of ultra wealthy people doing nice things for their workers and or communities. Sure. Seemingly eye-popping donations or paying for buildings, etc. I remember a story a few years ago of a multi-billionaire being lauded for giving their employees $10,000 plus 2 first-class plane tickets anywhere in the world after I think it was like the valuation of their company or something to celebrate. So on average, that would be a value of what, like $15,000? Which seems like a lot. That's a lot of money to just like give somebody. That would mean for 500 people, 500 employees, a cost of like $7.5 million. So if you're following, that's a lot of money, or at least it sounds like it. But out of a single $1 billion, which was not their entire wealth, that was just part of it, $7.5 million is not even 1% of that amount of money. That's how much money we're talking when we're talking about some of these ultra wealthy people. That sort of gesture or the sort of philanthropy that these people do, it's throwing pennies at people who made you rich and being applauded for your generosity. So yeah, not all growers can afford to give much away, but many growers give away substantial amounts of their food, money, and volunteer time to their communities, even though those farmers hardly have either time, money, or food to give, especially when we're doing the farmers markets ourselves. And most of the other farmers around us donated thousands of dollars every year to a local gleaning organization and sold thousands more to those on SNAP or WIC or among other sort of food assistance programs that made food available or affordable or whatever. And very last thing on this is that farmers should care about their community efforts. Absolutely, for sure. Community is a big part of farming. So try if you can, but if you can't, and you have nothing left at the end of the day, work on that first. You'll get there. But like I said, if you can't get all your needs met, it's going to be hard to take care of other people. Anyway, did I even address the topic? Sort of. I'm sure you'll let me know in the comment section. And thanks for the great topic suggestion, Jared. Otherwise, up next, we'll just go to the next logical conversation, cover crops. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. Newsletters, right? A necessary evil for CSA farmers. Join Farmhand and real CSA farmers on April 11th for a free digital workshop where they'll share strategies they use to turn their newsletters into powerful sales tools. Get the secrets and go-to templates for success when you register for the free workshop today at farmhand.partners/newsletter. That's farmhand.partners/newsletter. And I'll put the link in the show notes.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnwah Greenhouses. Harnwah Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnwah Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Harnwah is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Learn more at harnwah.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show.
All right, so cover crops can be amazing for soil, but not all cover crops make sense for all times of the year or all situations. Like some of you may be even asking, Jeffy, why on earth would someone want to plant a cover crop in spring when they should be planting food crops? Great question, and I don't know all the reasons they should, but I can come up with a few simple ones. Like for instance, perhaps you opened up new ground and don't need all of that space quite yet. Cover crops in that situation will help you keep the soil healthy and happy and in place headed into the summer. Or perhaps you cropped out some lettuce and have no plans for the bed for a couple weeks. Or maybe you just want to improve an area for fall production. No shortage of reasons to think about spring/early summer cover crops. Now, the biggest mistake growers make with cover crops, especially in a no-till situation, is not thinking about how they are going to terminate that cover crop before planting them. Like if you need something that can die easily and quickly in the summer, sorghum Sudan grass is not going to be your dude. Of course, if you're not going to need that bed for most of the summer, sorghum Sudan grass might be the perfect cover crop for you. So you will have to decide based on the list I'm about to give what you want to use, and I'll categorize them. The first category I'll just call the easy dyers. It sounds like a good band name, but we'll just call it the easy dyers. These are crops that are relatively easy to terminate. So if you decide you need that space or just are ready to terminate them in 6 weeks or so, it should not be a problem. So peas are an easy one here. Field peas germinate well in the spring and terminate easily with a very low to the ground mowing or a very, very light surface tillage. Buckwheat is another really great easy to kill cover crop, but it can be slow to germinate in the cold soil of the spring. So it's more of a mid to late season addition. And it's really nice if you just have 1 or 2 or 3 weeks where you don't have anything going into that bed, and you may as well just throw some buckwheat in there. In the summertime, it'll get, several inches tall in like 10 days. Things like radishes can be nice as well. That way you can harvest a few of those radishes as you go. And what you don't need, just mow them down and use the, kind of reclaim that biomass. Again, if you mow them really low to the ground, you can terminate them. So, and I will do a whole show on cover crop termination at some point to add to the whole lot of videos I've already done on cover crops and cover crop termination. But anyway, next category would be the flowers for bees and beneficials. Buckwheat fits here really well, but I don't love mixing buckwheat with anything else because it's so darn fast. So grow it for pollinators, absolutely. Just be careful when mixing it with other crops, or you may end up with buckweeds. I tried there. It's, you get the idea. Usually I sow it about a week or later than I sow whatever else I plan to mix it with, if I plan to mix it at all. Like, in other words, if I was going to mix it with sorghum Sudan grass or something, I would sow the sorghum Sudan grass. In a full week later, I would sow the buckwheat, if not, 10 days later. Also, as a low-lying and relatively easy flowering crop to grow, I like throwing sweet alyssum in there in the mix, which can also be planted beneath crops like tomatoes and cucumbers. And it brings in loads of awesome beneficials. Also, zinnias, cosmos, tithonia, dill, cilantro, and sunflowers are, I use those as kind of longer-term cover crop flower mixes. It's nice for the spring/summer, a little flowering combo that can take a little while to grow and establish, but will be nice, summer mix, and you can get some nice cut flowers from it. Plus, it feeds the butterflies and others. And those crops also really do wonders for the soil, so I have no issue with having those in there, especially if you don't immediately need that bed for anything. You will have to terminate it before stuff starts getting seedy in the middle of the summer, but for a while it will just rock and improve the soil nicely. You can also add Lacey Facilia to that mix, or its lovely purple blooms. That bed could easily double as a cut flower bed. Then it becomes a cover crop and a cash crop. Anyway, then on the longer term / kind of harder to kill side of things category, clearly these are all really thought out names, is the grains like oats and sorghum Sudan grass, which can be mowed very high on the stalk several times throughout the season, and it'll just kind of keep regrowing. Sorghum Sudan grass is great for that, and it promotes soil health like gangbusters. I like adding sunflowers and okra to that mix for a little diversity as well. Those two crops do not handle the mowing as well, obviously, but sorghum Sudan grass is a crop I typically reserve for my garlic beds. Let it grow all summer and then terminate it in the late fall before transplanting garlic into it and mulching. Corn and cowpeas could also be added to that mix, but again, they will more or less die when you mow it back, just to kind of keep it from going to seed, but also kind of increase that soil organic matter. But that may not be such a bad thing. Just let the sorghum Sudan grass take over mid-season and then kill it in the late fall when you need that bed. Anyway, that should be enough on cover crops to get the wheels turning. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up there. Don't forget, we are now officially a 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and to the team at No Till Growers. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of March, you get a shout on the show. So big shout outs today to Melody, Judy Swafford, Andy Piper, Carrie Hemphill Hart. Ooh, that's a fun one. Kevin Nazaroff, that's good too. Dustin Hefner, Bill Price. Good to see you there, Bill. And Glacier Kane. So this is the story of like a long time ago. There was this group. It wasn't that long. I mean, we're talking like maybe 20 years ago. There was this group who saw this advertisement for this like abandoned ghost town, and it was in Nevada. And they were all sort of young, and they were working in these like high profit industries, and none of them were really enjoying their time. So anyway, they decided to buy this town and this sort of ghost town. And their whole goal was to sort of turn this town into like an actual town, like basically create a city. But this particular ghost town had a secret, and it was just a little bit haunted, like an actual ghost town. And that's where our week begins. All right, thank you all for watching and or listening. We will see you tomorrow for Tuesday. Just keep them coming. Thanks. Bye.